This Christmas, by the fresh pine scent of the tree, my sister threw a paper on the table. Pack your bags. This house is for my in-laws to live in. I watched the red light blink on the smart doorbell. Noting the smeared notary stamp on the document, she waved. They thought I was just the quiet older sister clinging to the old house. They didn't know about the lease agreement hidden behind the daisy-tiled hearth, the one I wrote and signed myself. My name is Ivy Calder. At 33. I had come to understand that the most significant battles are waged not with shouts, but in the unnerving quiet that follows a declaration of war. The air in our Briarwick home, the old colonial at 17 Renfield Street, was thick with the scent of Christmas. Gingerbread, warm and spicy from the oven, mingled with the sharp, clean fragrance of pine from the tree dominating the living room. Outside, a thin cinematic layer of snow dusted the bare branches of the maples, muffling the world in a blanket of white. It was a scene of perfect, manufactured peace. I carried 2 steaming mugs of coffee from the kitchen, my footsteps silent on the worn oriental rug. The mugs were old, chipped at the rims, painted with cheerful but fading cardinals. They were Mom's. Everything in this house held a trace of her. I was about to call out, to offer a mug to my stepfather, Joel, when the front door swung open without a knock. The sudden rush of cold air felt like a violation. My younger sister, Eden, stood on the threshold, her husband, Miles Wright, a formidable shadow at her side. Eden was radiant, her cheeks flushed from the cold, her blonde hair perfectly styled even under a cashmere beanie. She wore a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than my last 3 car payments. Miles, ever the scion of the Wright masonry fortune, looked as if he had been sculpted from concrete and ambition, his smile a tight, proprietary slash across his face. They weren't here for holiday cheer. Their collective smirk was a weapon, and it was aimed directly at me. "Ivy," Eden said, her voice dripping with a cloying sweetness that set my teeth on edge. She swept past me, leaving a trail of expensive perfume in her wake, and tossed her gloves onto the antique sideboard. Miles closed the door with a definitive thud, the sound echoing in the sudden stillness. I placed the coffee mugs on the coasterless mahogany table, a small act of defiance. Eden, Miles, Merry Christmas. My voice was even, a placid lake I refused to let them disturb. Eden ignored the greeting. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a sheaf of papers, printed in sharp, vivid color. She slapped them onto the table, the sound unnaturally loud. "Deed transfer notice," she announced, the words crisp and rehearsed. She gestured toward the documents with a flourish of her perfectly manicured nails. "It's all been finalized, signed, sealed, and delivered." I didn't look at the papers. I looked at her, at the triumphant gleam in her blue eyes, so much like our mother's, yet holding a coldness Mom never possessed. I saw Miles place a possessive hand on her shoulder, his gaze sweeping the room, already mentally tearing down walls and measuring for new furniture. Then came the words I knew they had been savoring, the climax of their Christmas morning performance. Eden leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial, almost gleeful whisper. "Pack your bags. This house is for me. My in-laws to live in." The sentence hung in the air, a toxic bauble on the festive tree. It was an explosion, yet the room remained perfectly intact. The gingerbread still smelled sweet, the tree lights still twinkled. In the doorway leading to the dining room, my stepfather, Joel, cleared his throat. He leaned against the frame, a stooped silhouette against the light, his eyes fixed on a loose thread on his sweater. He had been a ghost in this house since Mom died, and now he was a ghost at my eviction. His silence was his signature on their decree. He was their witness, his inaction, his consent. A strange calm washed over me. This was the moment I had been preparing for, the one I had architected contingencies for in the lonely hours after midnight. My gaze drifted from Eden's smug face, past Miles's arrogant posture, past Joel's cowardly retreat, and settled on the small, black circle of the smart doorbell camera next to the door. I stared directly into its lens, a tiny, winking red light confirming it was active, recording, a perfect, unbiased witness to this holiday betrayal. Let the record show, I thought, let it capture every word, every triumphant smile. I brought my attention back to the room, to the three figures who believed they had just won. I picked up one of the coffee mugs, the warmth seeping into my cold hands. "This document," I began, my voice soft, almost conversational. "It has a notary stamp. Where did you get this notarized on December 25th? The question was a stone dropped into the tense silence. It wasn't an accusation, it was a simple, logistical inquiry. But I saw the flicker of uncertainty in Eden's eyes before her confidence resurfaced. She glanced at her husband. Miles chuckled, a low, dismissive sound. He stepped forward, taking charge. "Don't worry about the details. Ivy, my family has people who handle these things. Let's just say some offices open for the right clients." He oozed the casual arrogance of a man who had never encountered a door that couldn't be opened with his father's money. He believed rules were merely suggestions, inconveniences for lesser people. "I see," I said, taking a slow sip of coffee. It was scalding, but I didn't flinch. I reached for the iPad resting on the bookshelf beside my armchair. The screen came to life with a soft glow. My fingers moved deliberately across the glass. A few swift taps navigating to a browser window I had left open. It was the official website for the Halloway County Recorder of Deeds. A government page, stark and functional. A bright red banner stretched across the top. I angled the screen toward them. The text was large, unambiguous. "Office of the County Recorder is closed in observance of the Christmas holiday. All services will resume on December 26th. Beneath it, a list of all recognized public notaries in Briarwick, each marked with the same status. Office closed. Holiday. The blood drained from Eden's face. Miles's smirk faltered, hardening into a defensive line. He looked from the iPad to the colorful, useless papers on the table. For the first time, a crack appeared in their perfect, impenetrable plan. It was a hairline fracture, but it was there. The foundation was unsound. I set the iPad down, its screen still glowing with the truth. I looked at my sister, at the man she married, at the stepfather who had stood by and watched. The festive lights of the Christmas tree danced in my pupils. I allowed myself a small, tight smile. It held no warmth, no forgiveness. It was the smile of a game master revealing that the board was, and always had been, my own. "Well then," I said, my voice as calm and clear as the winter air. "Let's start with the truth, shall we?" My smile felt foreign on my own face as I watched them. Miles was already pulling out his phone, probably to call whichever back-alley fixer had provided him with the fraudulent notary stamp. Eden stared at the papers on the table as if they had personally betrayed her, the vibrant ink suddenly looking cheap and garish. Joel, my stepfather, had managed to shrink even further into the doorframe. My quiet question had shattered their festive illusion, and the silence in the room was now filled with the grinding of gears in minds that weren't used to being challenged. My gaze drifted upward, over their heads, to the large framed photograph hanging above the mantelpiece. It was the centerpiece of the living room, a testament to a life that had never really existed. In the photo, Eden and I stood on the front porch of this very house, bathed in the golden light of a long-ago summer. I was around 17, tall and awkward, with a bookish reticence plain on my face. Eden was 15, a sun-kissed prodigy of effortless charm. Her arms slung around my shoulders in a display of sisterly affection so convincing it could have won an award. Our mother, her face radiant but already showing the faint, hairline cracks of the illness that would eventually claim her, stood behind us, her hands on our shoulders. We looked like the perfect American family, the kind that graced the covers of local magazines. In Briarwick, Eden was, and always would be, the golden girl. I was her quiet, studious shadow. The world saw Eden's trajectory as a straight, glittering line. She was the homecoming queen who married the handsome heir to the Wright masonry fortune, the largest building material supplier in Halloway County. Her life was a curated series of triumphs, each one celebrated in the society pages. My path was less visible, cobbled together in the quiet hours of the night. While Eden was planning her lavish wedding, I was at community college, taking night classes in accounting. My textbooks spread out on the same kitchen table where our mother taught us to bake, while she was honeymooning in Tuscany. I was working as an intern, then a junior accountant, for a small real estate fund, learning the intricate dance of assets and liabilities. This house, 17 Renfield Street, was the only significant asset our mother had left. It wasn't just wood and nails. It was the repository of our childhood, the last tangible piece of her. And she had left it to us with a very specific, ironclad condition. It wasn't in the main body of the will, but in a separate codicil, a legal addendum that Joel, Eden, and Miles had apparently deemed a mere suggestion. It stipulated a right of occupancy for care. The house would be co-owned, but lifetime residency, the right to live within its walls, was granted to whichever daughter provided primary care for her during her final years. Our mother, a librarian with a love for precision, had been nothing if not thorough. The final years were a blur of beige hospital corridors and the sharp, antiseptic smell of rubbing alcohol. They were a litany of prescriptions, doctor's appointments, and long sleepless nights spent listening to the strained rhythm of Mom's breathing. I was the one who learned to crush pills into applesauce, who bathed her when she was too weak to stand, who held the basin for her when the chemotherapy ravaged her body. I was the one who read to her from her favorite novels when her eyes could no longer focus on the words. During this time, Eden was perpetually, tragically, busy. Her life was a whirlwind of engagement parties, bridal showers, and cake tastings. Her concern came in the form of brief, breathless phone calls. "Oh, Ivy, you're a saint," she would chirp. "I'm swamped with the seating charts. You wouldn't believe the drama with Miles's aunt. Give Mom a kiss for me." A kiss, sent by proxy, was the sum of her contribution. I never argued. I just nodded, hung up the phone, and went back to changing Mom's bedsheets. I did it not for the house, but because I loved her, but I never forgot the terms of the will. The day after the funeral, with the scent of lilies still clinging to the air, Eden found me in the kitchen. She placed a sympathetic hand on my arm, her expression a perfect mask of sorrow. "You've been so strong, Ivy," she said. "Listen, don't feel like you have to rush. You can stay here for a bit, get yourself sorted, but you'll need to start looking for your own place soon. Miles and I have so many plans for this house." "Stay here for a bit." The words echoed in the hollow space inside me. She saw me as a guest, a temporary tenant in my own home, in the very space I had earned the right to inhabit through years of selfless, exhausting care. That was the moment the grief in my heart began to crystallize into something harder, something colder. It was the moment I stopped being a sister and became an adversary. I didn't argue then, either. I just nodded. The next week, I quietly applied for a new job. Not just any job. I targeted one firm, Stone and Sparrow Capital, the most aggressive real estate investment fund in Halloway County. They didn't just buy and sell property. They specialized in distressed assets, complex ownership structures, and ironclad legal frameworks. It took me 3 interviews, but I got the position, not in general accounting, but in the department I had specifically requested, compliance and covenants. It sounded dull, a world of fine print and legal jargon, but I knew better. Covenants are the soul of property law. They are the promises and restrictions that bind a piece of land through generations of owners. They are the hidden tripwires, the secret passages, the unbreachable walls in the world of real estate. I immersed myself in it. I learned how trusts could shield assets, how lease agreements could override ownership claims, how a single, well-placed clause could render a deed transfer utterly powerless. I became an expert in the very weapons I would need to defend my home. In the photograph above the mantel, Eden's arm is wrapped around me in a gesture of loving protection. in the real world, outside the frame. Her emails began to arrive, first, once a month, then every 2 weeks. Hi, Ivy. Hope you're doing well. Any thoughts on your timeline for moving? The Wrights are asking. They were always cheerful, always casual, little poison darts wrapped in politeness. Just checking in. Miles found a fantastic contractor and we're eager to get started on the renovations. I never replied, not once. Instead, I would go into my mother's study, unlock the small fireproof box where she kept her important documents, and take out the will. I would read the codicil, her spidery signature at the bottom, the notary's seal crisp and clear. I read it over and over, my fingers tracing the words, occupancy for care, and primary caregiver. It was not just a legal document, it was my mother's final testament, her last act of seeing me, of knowing who I truly was. It became my prayer, my mantra, my declaration of rights. And with the knowledge from my new career sharpening my focus, and the memory of Eden's casual cruelty fueling my resolve, I began to collect my evidence. Every prescription receipt with my signature, every page of the detailed log I kept of Mom's medication schedule, every canceled check for her medical supplies. I was building a fortress, brick by silent brick, right under their noses. They saw a quiet sister in a sad, old house. They had no idea they were looking at the architect of their downfall. The truth wasn't a single, simple fact. It was a structure, built meticulously over 2 years, beam by beam. In the silence they mistook for surrender, while they saw me as a grieving sister, a quiet obstruction. I was operating as the compliance officer I had become. My work at Stone and Sparrow Capital wasn't just a job, it was an education, and I was a very fast learner. The first step, taken 18 months ago, was to insulate myself. I used a small portion of my mother's life insurance payout, the part left directly to me, which Eden hadn't known about, to establish the Renfield Trust. I hired an independent attorney from 2 towns over, a man with no ties to Briarwick or the Wright family, to act as the trustee. The trust's sole purpose was to hold and manage assets related to 17 Renfield Street, the ultimate beneficiary of this trust. The paperwork listed the stakeholders simply as confidential. That beneficiary was me. This legal separation was critical. It meant the owner of the assets would be a dispassionate legal entity, not a person they could emotionally pressure or bully. The second step was the most crucial. This house, co-owned by Eden and me, still had a substantial mortgage, a mortgage our mother had taken out years ago for a new roof and foundation repairs. With Mom gone and the estate technically unsettled due to the co-ownership, the bank was growing nervous. They saw 2 sisters, one of whom, Eden, was clearly not in residence, and another, me, who was armed with a powerful occupancy for care clause, to the bank. My legal right to live here indefinitely made the property toxic. It was a non-performing asset. They couldn't foreclose without an ugly legal battle, and they couldn't sell it with such a significant encumbrance. It was, in their terms, a bad loan. And I knew that banks hate bad loans. Using my year-end bonus from Stone and Sparrow, a substantial sum earned for untangling a portfolio of distressed commercial properties, I initiated a quiet negotiation. I didn't approach the bank as Ivy called her. My attorney, acting on behalf of the newly formed Renfield Trust, made an offer to buy the mortgage note. We offered them 40 cents on the dollar, in cash, for a quick, clean exit. The bank, seeing a chance to wash its hands of a complicated file and recoup at least some of its capital before year-end, eagerly accepted. The transaction was completed in a single afternoon. The bank sold the note. The Renfield Trust bought it, and just like that, I became my own creditor. Or rather, my trust, held the kiukno. I owned the debt on my own home. Eden and Miles, with all their bluster and Wright masonry money, were completely oblivious. They were planning to renovate a house they didn't even realize was beholden to a creditor more powerful and more patient than any bank. But holding the note wasn't enough. I needed to solidify my residency beyond the occupancy for care clause, which could, in theory, be challenged in a protracted court battle. However strong my evidence, I needed a second, commercial-grade layer of protection. So, the Renfield Trust, as the new note holder and, by extension, the primary lien holder, executed a master lease agreement. The tenant? A new entity I created. Calder Living LLC, my LLC, funded by my salary, became the formal legal tenant of 17 Renfield Street. The lease was a work of art, drafted with all the aggressive precision I had learned at Stone and Sparrow. It was a 10-year term, with 2 automatic 10-year renewal options, a 30-year lease. Effectively, it specified that all utilities, maintenance, and property taxes would be managed by the tenant, Calder Living LLC. And buried in Section 4B, subsection 3, was a clause I had written myself. No assignment of title or interest, any attempted assignment, transfer, or conveyance of title, deed, or possessory interest related to this property on a federally recognized bank holiday shall be deemed null, void, and an immediate breach of covenant. It was a trap, baited with their own arrogance. I knew they would try to pull a fast one, to use their influence and cut corners. And what better time to cut corners than a holiday, when they believed all legitimate oversight was closed? My defenses were now threefold. I was the primary caregiver with the occupancy right. I was the note holder, the creditor they would have to pay, and I was the managing member of the LLC that was the sole legal tenant of the property. Next came the technology. The smart doorbell wasn't a Christmas gift. I had it installed last March. The high-definition cameras covering the porch, the driveway, and the back door weren't for neighborhood watch. They were corporate assets of Calder Living LLC. All recordings were saved instantly to an off-site, encrypted cloud server, time-stamped and legally admissible. The new digital lock on the front door logged every entry, by code or by key. My home was no longer just a house. It was a documented, secure asset. The blinking red light that Eden and Miles had ignored was not a festive decoration. It was my primary witness. Then, I built the paper trail. For the last 6 months, on the first of every month, Calder Living LLC had dutifully transferred the rent payment via ACH to the Renfield Trust. It was my money moving from my right pocket to my left, but on paper, it created a flawless history. I was, by every legal definition, a tenant in good standing. Any eviction attempt would have to go through a commercial court, not a simple family dispute. Finally, I prepared for the inevitable confrontation. I gathered the evidence for the occupancy for care clause, copies of the family doctor's logs, pharmacy receipts spanning 4 years, a sworn affidavit from Mom's home nurse attesting to my role as sole caregiver. I took all of it to Clara Notary, a bonded and insured notary public on the other side of the county, on December 20th, a normal Tuesday. She reviewed every page, and then, in her official logbook, she stamped and signed a declaration confirming the authenticity of the copies. I placed this entire package in a thick manila envelope and sealed it with wax, just for effect. On the front, I wrote in black marker, "Open if challenged." That envelope was now sitting in the top drawer of the very sideboard Eden had tossed her gloves onto. I did not tell a single soul. I did not breathe a word to my attorney, to my colleagues, or to the ghost of Joel in the hallway. I simply went to work, paid my self-imposed rent, and maintained my home. I waited. I knew they were planning something. Eden's smug emails had given way to an ominous silence in the last few weeks. They were getting impatient. The Wright family wanted their asset. And now, this, a fraudulent document, a public declaration of eviction on Christmas Day, all dutifully recorded by my own camera. They hadn't just walked into my home. They had walked, with absolute confidence, straight into the fortress I had built to trap them. My question: where did you get this notarized on December 25th? Hangs in the room like a shard of ice. It's a simple, factual query. But to them, it's an accusation of a crime, because that's precisely what it is. Eden's face, a moment ago so flush with victory, becomes a pale, brittle mask. Miles, however, is pure right. His family didn't build their mediocre construction empire through intelligence, but through brute force and the assumption that everyone else was an idiot. He recovers first, his face darkening. You think you're clever, don't you, Ivy? I don't answer. I just hold his gaze. I know exactly what they did. This wasn't a plan born of legal savvy. It was a crude, greedy power grab, conceived in the echo chamber of their own entitlement. Their true motive wasn't just to possess the house. It was to liquidate it, the Wright Masonry showroom. Their grand expansion project was over budget and behind schedule. I'd seen the public filings. Stone and Sparrow made it our business to know the financial health of every major contractor in the county. They were desperate for capital. Their plan was simple. Seize the house, use Miles's construction crews for a rapid, shoddy flip in 2 weeks, and then, using their inflated valuation, refinance the property to pull out hundreds of thousands in tax-free cash. My home was nothing but collateral for their failing business venture, and their execution was as sloppy as their motive. I could picture the scene perfectly, and I was sure the discovery process would prove me right. Last night, Christmas Eve, at a lavish party at the Wright compound, Miles, full of scotch and self-importance, complaining about his squatter sister-in-law, one of his father's golfing buddies, or perhaps a second cousin who'd passed the bar in another state, offers to fix it. Don't worry, Miles, we'll get it done. A field notary, they call them, a person with a stamp, a pen, and a flexible moral compass, willing to backdate a document or ignore the fact that they're witnessing a signature on a federal holiday in exchange for a favor. They didn't even bother to craft a plausible transfer. They'd opted for a deed of gift from Eden as co-owner to Eden as sole owner, a legal impossibility without my signature, but it looked official enough to wave in my face. Miles, I knew, had bragged to Eden. I'll handle it. His idea of handling it was a call to a high school friend who held a junior clerk position at the county land registry, promising him courtside tickets to a game to push the paperwork through on the 26th. He genuinely believed that was all it took. This morning's ambush was the culmination of that sloppy, arrogant plan. It was preceded by a single text message, which had lit up my phone at 10:14 p.m. last night. While I was reading by the fire, it was from Eden. Just so you're prepared, Ivy, Miles's family is taking over the property. You have 48 hours to vacate. This is a final courtesy. I hadn't replied. I had simply taken a screenshot and saved it to my encrypted Renfield file. Now, in the living room, the silence stretches, thick and toxic. Miles snorts, a sound of pure disgust. You can stay here and play with your iPad. Ivy, it doesn't matter. The transfer is filed. He grabs Eden by the arm. Let's go. She'll figure it out when the trucks get here. He pulls her toward the door. Eden pauses, looks back at me. A flicker of something, maybe doubt, maybe just annoyance at her performance being ruined, in her eyes. You're ruining Christmas, Ivy, she whispers, as if I were the one holding the fraudulent deed. They slam the door. Joel, who has not moved or spoken a single word, slides backward into the dining room and disappears, a ghost dissolving in the morning light. The house is quiet again, but the air is vibrating. The smell of gingerbread is now acrid, the pine scent suffocating. I walk to the window and watch them. They don't leave. They get into Miles's gleaming black pickup truck, parked at the curb, and they sit there, watching the house. They are waiting for me to panic, to run out with a suitcase. I do not. I simply retrieve the garish, color-printed deed transfer from the table. I slide it into a clear plastic sleeve and place it in my briefcase. Exhibit A. An hour passes. The standoff continues. Then, another vehicle pulls up. It's a large flatbed truck, with the Wright Masonry logo emblazoned on the door in an obnoxious, bold font. It's not a moving van. It's a piece of construction equipment, a tool of intimidation. It parks directly in front of my walkway, blocking the path. Miles gets out of his truck, followed by a woman I recognize from Eden's wedding photos. Karina Wright, his mother. She is tall, thin, and wears her disdain like a fur coat. They march up the walkway, not to the door, but to the small patch of lawn by the steps. Miles is carrying something. He hammers a sign into the half-frozen turf. I don't need to go outside to read the large, block letters, property of right masonry, no trespassing. Then they walk to my front door. Karina hands Miles a piece of paper, laminated. He pulls a roll of thick packing tape from his pocket and tapes the sign directly onto the painted wood of the door. Notice to occupant. New ownership. All prior residents must vacate premises within 24 hours. They stand back to admire their work, then turn and walk back to the truck, their posture radiating smug satisfaction. They believe this is the final move. They believe their signs and their trucks are law. I wait until they are settled back in their cab, watching me. I go to the hall closet and pull on my boots. I don't bother with a coat. I open the front door. The cold hits me instantly. They both sit up, watching. I walk calmly to the door, dig my fingernail under the edge of the packing tape, and slowly, deliberately, peel the sign off my door. The sound is a violent creep in the quiet street. I look at the sign, fold it in half, and walk back inside, closing the door with a quiet, definitive click. I slide it into the plastic sleeve behind the deed. Exhibit B. I walk to the kitchen, pick up my phone, and dial. Not my lawyer, not the police. A cheerful automated voice answers, "Thank you for calling the Briarwick Zoning and Planning Office. Our offices are closed for the holiday." I press 0, knowing it will route to an on-call inspector for emergencies. "Zoning, this is Marcus." "Hello, Marcus. Merry Christmas," I say, my voice light and pleasant. "My name is Ivy Calder. I have a quick question about zoning at 17 Renfield Street. That's an R1 single-family zone, correct?" "Yes, ma'am. That's correct," he replies, his voice weary. "Great. I was wondering what the regulations are regarding multifamily occupancy. For instance, if another entire family, say a set of in-laws, wanted to move in permanently with the current resident, would that be permitted?" I hear him sigh, the sound of bureaucracy grinding. "No, ma'am, absolutely not. R1 zoning strictly prohibits multifamily occupancy. You'd need to apply for a conversion permit, which requires a public hearing and architectural plans. It's almost never granted in the Renfield Historic District. Attempting to do so without a permit is a significant violation, subject to immediate fines." "I see," I say, a genuine warmth in my voice. "That's exactly what I needed to know. You've been very helpful. Marcus, enjoy your holiday." I hang up. They aren't just trying to evict me. They're planning an illegal conversion, a zoning violation, a fact I will add to my growing file. I look out the window. The truck is still there. They are stewing. They expected tears. They expected a fight. They did not expect methodical, quiet compliance with the actual law. I open my iPad. I go to my Stone and Sparrow Capital Corporate calendar. I create a new event for 7 p.m. this evening. Title: Emergency Vendor Integrity Review. Right Masonry. I invite the CEO, the CFO, and our General Counsel. I attach 2 items: the 30-second video file from my doorbell camera of Eden's ultimatum and the screenshot of her 48-hour text message. I press send. The invitation flies out into the digital ether. The house is quiet. The truck idles outside. I sit in my mother's armchair, the scent of gingerbread and pine swirling around me. I have laid the foundations, built the walls, and set the traps. Now, all I have to and wait. The afternoon was still young. The stalemate held for hours. They remained in their truck, a silent, hulking beast at the curb. I remained in my armchair, a silent watcher behind the glass. The snow outside began to fall a little thicker, the flakes fat and lazy. The old house was quiet, save for the rhythmic click and hum of the forced air heater kicking on, a sound as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. It was the sound of home, a sound they were trying to steal. At 3:12 p.m., my front door opened again. This time, they didn't hesitate. Miles, Eden, and his mother, Karina Wright, strode in as if they were returning from a brief errand. Their patience had worn thin, and they had decided that possession was 10/10 of the law. They were going to create facts on the ground. Karina, a woman who looked like she was carved from a block of expensive ice, began surveying the living room, her eyes cataloging every piece of my mother's furniture with undisguised contempt. Miles stood with his arms crossed, a smug bouncer in his own fantasy. But it was Eden who made the first move. She walked into the kitchen, the heart of the house, my mother's sanctuary. I heard the creak of a cabinet door, then another. She was taking inventory. Her voice, brittle and loud, cut through the quiet house. "Karina, come look at this china. It's ancient." A pause. "It'll have to go. We can move our things in next week, once Ivy's junk is cleared out." That was the signal. That was the line. I rose from my armchair. All three of them turned to look at me, their expressions a mixture of annoyance and anticipation. They expected me to yell, to cry, to finally break. I did none of those things. I picked up my iPad from the bookshelf. My movements were calm, deliberate. I walked to the mahogany coffee table in the center of the room and placed the device down, angling the screen toward them. I tapped the screen once. The video began to play. The image was perfectly clear. Captured in high definition, it was our front porch. From this morning, my own voice, calm and even, saying, "Eden, Miles, Merry Christmas." Then Eden's voice, sharp and high-pitched, filled the room. The audio was crystal clear, the microphone having picked up every syllable. "Deed transfer notice. It's all been finalized." And then the crescendo. "Pack your bags. This house is for me, my in-laws to live in." The words, her own words, echoed in the silent living room. Eden froze, her hand still on a cabinet handle in the kitchen doorway. The color drained from her face. Miles's jaw tightened. Karina's perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up. As the video of their morning ambush played on a loop, a silent testament to their malice. My fingers were already moving. I opened my email client. A draft I had prepared days ago was waiting. It was a simple, elegant weapon. The recipient list was a carefully curated audience of my choosing. The main addressee was the official records email for the Halloway County Recorder. On the CC line, I added the public inquiry address for the Briarwick Zoning Office and the notoriously fastidious president of the Renfield Gardens Homeowners Association. The subject line was stark and professional. Notice of illegal assignment attempt on federal holiday and breach of covenant. The body of the email was brief. To whom it may concern. This email serves as formal notice of an illegal attempt to record a deed transfer for the property located at 17 Renfield Street, Briarwick, on the federal holiday of December 25th. Attached for your reference are 1. A video file documenting the attempt by the aggressing parties, and 2. A copy of the binding master lease agreement for the property, which explicitly voids any such transfer attempt under Section 4B3. All rights are reserved. Sincerely, Ivy Calder, Managing Member, Calder Living, LLC. I attached the two files, the doorbell video they were currently watching, and the PDF of the lease agreement. My finger hovered over the send button for a single, satisfying second, then I pressed it. The email was gone. Next, I toggled to my Stone & Sparrow corporate email account on my phone. I sent a second, even more direct message. This one was addressed to the primary accounts payable contact at Wright Masonry, with a CC to their CEO, Miles's father. The subject, Official Notice of Default and Vendor Integrity Review. Pursuant to Section 9 of your contractor agreement with Stone & Sparrow Capital, this serves as a notice of default. An agent of your company, Miles Wright, has engaged in an illegal attempt to seize a private asset belonging to an officer of this fund. This action constitutes a material breach of the vendor integrity and compliance clauses of our agreement. All payments on Project 714B are hereby suspended pending an immediate review. I hit send on that one too. The effect was not immediate, but it was swift. My iPad, still playing the video, was connected to my phone's hotspot. The notifications began to arrive, each one a small ping, a hammer blow to their fantasy. Ping! An automated reply appeared on my screen, projected from my phone. It was from the Briarwick Zoning Office. From zoning@briarwick.gov. Subject: Notice of illegal assignment. Thank you for your submission. An inspector has been scheduled to visit 17 Renfield Street on December 27th at 9:00 a.m. to investigate a potential illegal occupancy violation. Miles took a half step forward. What is this? Ping. The second email was from the HOA, the president, a retired busybody named Carol, apparently never slept. From Carol, p.renfieldgardenshoa.com. Subject: Notice of illegal assignment. Miss Calder, thank you for bringing this to our attention. Attempting an unauthorized occupancy transfer, especially on a holiday, is a serious violation of Bylaw 7.3. A fine of $1,000 has been assessed against the property's co-owner, Ms. Eden Wright. Any attempt to move new occupants in before this is resolved will result in further penalties. Eden finally moved. Stepping fully into the living room, she looked from the iPad to my phone, her eyes wide with disbelief. You can't do this. Ping. The third email, the county recorder's office. From records at Halloway County, Gov. Subject: auto reply, office closed. This is an automated confirmation that our office was closed on December 25th. No deed transfers or other official recordings were processed or accepted on this date. The video on the iPad finally finished its loop, and the screen went dark. The room was plunged back into a thick, suffocating silence. The only sounds were the hum of the heater and the 3 automated pings that had just dismantled their entire plan. Eden stared at Miles, her perfect mask of confidence shattering into a million pieces. All the arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, naked panic. Miles, you said your friend would handle it. Miles was speechless, his face a mottled red. He looked at me, his eyes burning with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. It was Karina Wright who spoke. She had remained silent, watching the digital onslaught with a pinched, critical expression. Now, she stepped forward, her voice low and dangerous, dripping with the condescension of old money. "Just who do you think you are?" she hissed, looking me up and down as if I were something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "This is a family matter. You're just a sad little girl clinging to your mother's house." I met her gaze. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I held all the cards. I let her insult hang in the air for a moment. Then I picked up my phone from the coffee table. I held it to my ear, as if answering a call they hadn't heard. And I delivered the final, fatal blow. "I'm the note holder." The words, "I'm the note holder," land in the silent room not with a shout, but with the dead, heavy thud of a closing vault door. Karina Wright's face, a carefully constructed mask of aristocratic disdain, twitches. The term is unfamiliar to her, a piece of jargon from a world she only interacts with from a position of power. But Miles understands. His face, already a mottled red, goes a stark, waxy white. He's in the construction business. He deals with banks, with liens, with debt. He knows exactly what a note holder is. It is the entity to whom the debt is owed. It is the ultimate authority. Eden just looks confused, her panic momentarily eclipsed by her incomprehension. "What does that mean? What note?" "The mortgage, Eden," I say, my voice patient, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. "The very large bank loan on this house that you seem to have forgotten about, I own it." The implication settles over them, a slow, creeping poison. They came here to claim an asset, only to find out they were squatting in a property owned by their creditor, and their creditor was me. I gesture toward the dining room. "We should probably sit down." It is not a request. It is a command. For the first time, They follow my lead. We move from the living room, the site of their failed ambush, to the dining room. The table is set. It was a hopeful gesture I'd made this morning, laying out my mother's best linen tablecloth, a festive crimson red, and polishing the silver until it gleamed under the soft light of the chandelier. I had imagined a quiet Christmas dinner, perhaps with Joel. Now, the table has become a battlefield, the gleaming knives looking more like weapons than utensils. We take our seats, a tableau of a family utterly broken. Karina sits ramrod straight, her fury a palpable force field. Miles slumps in his chair, his eyes darting between me and the useless papers he brought. Eden sinks into her seat, looking small and lost, her bravado completely gone. She attempts one last, desperate grasp at normalcy. She forces a laugh, a brittle, ugly sound. Ivy, honestly, this has all been a big misunderstanding. You're taking this way too seriously. I don't answer her. Instead, I reach into the inner pocket of my blazer, which I had put on before they re-entered the house. I retrieve the thick manila envelope, the one with the wax seal, the one labeled in my own stark, black handwriting. Open if challenged. I slide it across the polished wood of the table. It stops directly in front of Eden. I believe we've reached the challenged stage, don't you? Her hand trembles as she reaches for it. Miles puts his hand out to stop her, but Karina gives a sharp, almost imperceptible nod. Open it. Eden breaks the wax seal with her thumbnail. She pulls out the contents. It's a thick stack of documents. She begins to read, her eyes scanning the first page. The first document is the codicil to our mother's will, the occupancy for care clause, highlighted in yellow. Eden has seen it before, but dismissed it. The second document is a sworn, notarized affidavit from Dr. Alistair Finch, our mother's physician of 20 years. It states, in cold clinical detail, that for the last 4 years of her life, all medical consultations, care directives, and prescription management were handled exclusively by Ivy Calder. Beneath that is a copy of a single page from his logbook, dated a month before Mom's death. His handwriting is a barely legible scrawl, but the words are clear. Daughter Eden called to cancel her scheduled visit. Cited a dress fitting. Ivy remains sole caregiver. Patient is declining. Eden makes a small, wounded sound in the back of her throat. The final document in the stack is the kill shot. It is a detailed, multi-page spreadsheet. The header reads, Medication and Care Log, Eleanor Calder. It lists every pill, every dosage, every meal, every bath, every middle-of-the-night emergency for 4 years. In the column marked Administered by my name, Ivy, is written over and over again, thousands of times. The column next to it, Assisted by, is almost entirely blank, save for 2 entries in the first year, next to which is written, Eden, phone call. Eden drops the papers as if they have burned her. This is not a legal argument. This is the unvarnished, documented truth of her absence, her neglect. Miles snatches up the stack, his eyes wild. He flips through them, and then something else catches his eye. Tucked within my documents is another sheet of paper, a color printout. It's a screenshot of an email he sent last night from his personal account to a man named Ricky D. The subject line is Xmas Rush Job. The body of the email reads, Rick, need that notary stamp for the house thing. My treat at the club next week. Just make it look good. Attached to the email is a photograph. It shows a notary stamp sitting on a bar, next to a half-empty glass of amber liquid. The stamp is visibly crooked, inked unevenly, a picture of cheap fraudulence. A bead of sweat trickles down Miles's temple. This is evidence, hard, undeniable evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. It's the kind of thing that gets business licenses revoked. Karina sees the look on her son's face and realizes they have lost control. She abandons all pretense of civility. Her voice is a low, vicious snarl. This is ridiculous. You've been plotting this, you little snake. We'll sue you. We will bury you in legal fees until you are begging on the street. I meet her gaze. I do not flinch. I take a slow sip of water. You could certainly try, I say, my voice level. But you should know, my emergency board meeting with Stone and Sparrow is in 3 hours, and when I present them with evidence that the principal of our primary vendor for the new downtown development, Wright Masonry, is engaged in criminal fraud to seize assets from a fund officer, well, I'm fairly certain they won't just terminate the contract. They'll likely sue you for breach of contract and reputational damages. That's a $2.8 million contract. I believe your legal fees for me will be a rounding error compared to that. The threat lands with the force of a physical blow. The color drains from Karina's face. She knows I'm not bluffing. This isn't a family squabble anymore. I have tied my mother's house to the fate of her family's entire business. Checkmate. Completely defeated, Eden turns her head, her eyes swimming with tears, searching for one last ally. She looks past me, to the doorway where my stepfather, Joel, has been standing, a silent, pathetic sentinel. "Joel," she pleads, her voice cracking. Tell her she can't do this. Mom wanted us to share." Joel has been staring at his empty dinner plate as if it holds the secrets of the universe. He doesn't look up. He just shakes his head slowly, his voice a barely audible murmur, a confession of his own cowardice. She's not lying. Eden, the will, the doctor. She's not lying. It is the final nail in the coffin of Eden's fantasy. I decide it is time for one final flourish. I reach into my pocket and pull out a small digital voice recorder. I press play. A tinny, recorded voice fills the room. "Thank you for calling the Halloway County Legal Aid Hotline. How can I help you?" My own voice, recorded 6 months ago, replies, "Hello, my name is Ivy Calder. I'm calling to get a clear definition of my rights under an occupancy for care codicil to a will when the property is co-owned by a hostile party. The recording continues for another minute, my voice calmly and methodically asking questions, establishing my legal standing, creating a record of my due diligence long before they ever made their move. I press stop. The silence that follows is absolute. There is nothing left for them to say. Every lie has been exposed, every threat neutralized, every escape route sealed. I look at each of them in turn. Karina, defeated. Miles, terrified. Eden, broken. "Today is a federal holiday," I say, my voice soft but unwavering. "A day when official business is not conducted. Everything you did today, the fraudulent paper, the threats, the illegal notice on my door, it is all without force or effect. It is, legally speaking, nothing. It never happened." Outside, the wind picks up, rattling the old window panes. It howls down the chimney, a long, mournful sound like a final, weary sigh. They left without another word. There was no grand exit, no final, shouted threat. There was only a quiet, toxic retreat. Karina Wright, her face a mask of frozen fury, swept out the door first. Miles followed. His shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. The posture of a bully who had just been punched in the mouth and didn't know how to react. Eden was the last to leave. She paused in the doorway and looked back at me, her face a mess of confusion, tears, and a dawning, horrified understanding. She had been a pawn in a game far more complex than she'd ever imagined. Then she was gone, pulled away by the gravitational force of the Wright family's failure. I watched from the window as they got into their respective vehicles and drove away, their tires crunching on the freshly fallen snow. The menacing Wright masonry truck was the last to leave, rumbling down the quiet street like a defeated beast. The silence they left behind was profound. It was a clean, empty silence, scrubbed of their entitlement and aggression. For the first time all day, I could breathe. The house felt like my own again, but my work was not done. The battle for the house was won, but the war for my future was about to begin. I went not to my own bedroom, but to my mother's study. It was a small room at the back of the house, lined with bookshelves and smelling faintly of old paper and Earl Grey tea. It was where she had balanced her checkbook, written her letters, and in the end, drafted the will that had become my shield. I sat down at her old oak desk, opened my laptop, and waited for the clock to strike 7 p.m. At precisely 7 p.m., a window popped up on my screen. I clicked Join Meeting. One by one, their faces appeared in the Brady Bunch grid of a corporate Zoom call. First, Alistair Sterling, the chairman and CEO of Stone & Sparrow Capital, a man in his late 60s with silver hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He wasn't a man who enjoyed surprises, especially not on Christmas Day. Next, Marcus Thorne, our CFO, younger, sharper, a man who saw the world as a series of balance sheets. To Marcus, everything had a number, and his job was to make sure that number was black. Finally, Arthur Vance, our general counsel, a man who looked like he'd been born in a three-piece suit, his expression perpetually neutral, his mind a fortress of case law and contractual loopholes. The title of the meeting, which I had set, glowed at the top of the screen: Emergency Vendor Integrity Review. Wright Masonry. Sterling spoke first, his voice a low baritone that commanded attention even through laptop speakers. Ms. Calder, this is highly unusual. I trust you have a compelling reason for interrupting our holidays. I do, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice even and professional. I was no longer Ivy the sister, the daughter, the victim. I was Ms. Calder, compliance officer. I have uncovered a material breach of conduct by a principal of one of our key vendors, a breach that poses a significant and immediate risk to the firm. I shared my screen. Item 1, I began, my tone that of a presenter at a quarterly review. At 10:48 this morning, I was subjected to an illegal eviction attempt at my private residence, orchestrated by Miles Wright, the COO of Wright Masonry and the son of its CEO. I played the video from the doorbell camera. The 30-second clip played out in perfect, damning clarity. I watched their faces as they watched the screen. Sterling's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed. Marcus Thorne leaned closer to his camera, his brow furrowed. Arthur Vance, the lawyer, watched with a kind of detached, professional interest, like a biologist examining a particularly venomous specimen. When the video finished, I didn't pause for commentary. Item 2, I continued, dragging a file into the shared view. The attempt was based on a fraudulent deed transfer document, which the parties attempted to enforce on a federal holiday. I displayed the photo of the crooked, wine-stained notary stamp, taken from the screenshot of Miles's email. As you can see, the instrument of the fraud was unprofessional and demonstrates clear criminal intent. Arthur Vance unmuted his microphone. His voice was dry as dust. Conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. A felony. He muted himself again. Item 3, I said, pulling up the email chain from the afternoon. I served notice of this illegal attempt to the relevant county and homeowners association authorities. I have already received replies. I highlighted the key phrases for them. Inspection scheduled to investigate a potential illegal occupancy violation from the zoning office. A fine of $1,000 has been assessed from the HOA, and an automated confirmation from the county recorder that their office was, in fact, closed. I stopped sharing my screen and looked directly into my camera, meeting Sterling's gaze. In the span of a few hours, Miles Wright has engaged in felony fraud, initiated an illegal eviction, and incurred multiple official violations and fines against a property, all in an attempt to unlawfully seize a personal asset. The virtual room was silent for a long moment. It was Marcus Thorne, the CFO, who spoke first, cutting to the heart of the matter from his perspective. This is a serious personal issue, Ms. Calder, no doubt. But what does it have to do with Stone & Sparrow? Why is this an emergency meeting? This was the question I was waiting for. This was the bridge between my personal battle and their corporate interests. It has everything to do with us, Marcus, I replied, my voice hard and certain. This wasn't just about a house. It was about money. Wright Masonry is financially overextended on their new showroom project. My analysis of their public filings shows a significant cash flow problem. They attempted to seize my residence, an unencumbered asset in their minds, not to live in it, but to use it as collateral. They were going to flip it to secure a line of credit to prop up their failing business. I let that sink in. This raises the question of collateral risk, I continued. Now in my full compliance officer persona, we have entrusted Wright Masonry with a $2.8 million contract. Their principal officer has demonstrated a willingness to commit felonies to secure capital. What happens when they hit a cash crunch on our project? Do they start using substandard materials? Do they cut corners on safety compliance? Do they submit fraudulent invoices? His actions show a fundamental corruption in his business practices. He is an unacceptable risk to this firm. Arthur Vance unmuted himself again. He didn't need to be convinced. She's right, he stated flatly. The integrity clause in our vendor contracts is explicit. Any act of moral turpitude or criminal conduct by a company officer is grounds for immediate suspension and review. This is not a gray area. Sterling, who had been listening intently, a statue of corporate power, finally spoke. He addressed Vance. Suspension. Arthur, not termination? We suspend the contract and all payments immediately, Vance clarified. We launch a formal ethics investigation. If the investigation confirms Ms. Calder's evidence, and I have no reason to doubt it, we then have grounds for termination with cause, and we can potentially sue for damages. The decision was made. It was that fast. In the world of high-stakes capital, there is no room for sentiment. There is only risk and its mitigation. Do it, Sterling commanded. Marcus, freeze all payments to Wright Masonry, effective immediately. Arthur, draft the suspension notice. I want it on my desk tonight. Yes, sir, they both said in unison. My heart was pounding, but my face remained a calm, neutral mask. I had won. I had not only defended my home, I had decapitated the enemy. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, I said. You have done your job. Ms. Calder, he replied, a faint hint of approval in his tone. You identified a risk and brought it to our attention with clear, actionable evidence. I was about to sign off, to let them return to their interrupted Christmas dinners, but I had one last card to play. This one wasn't for me. This was for the firm. Mr. Sterling, if I may add one final piece of market intelligence, I asked. He nodded. My sources indicate that Wright Masonry has been in late-stage financing negotiations for their showroom project with one of our chief competitors, Norcrest Ridge Capital. I suspect the line of credit they intended to secure with my property was a prerequisite for Norcrest finalizing that deal. With our contract now suspended, Wright's financial position becomes untenable. Norcrest will almost certainly back away from the deal once word gets out. I paused, letting the strategic implications land. This may present an opportunity for Stone & Sparrow to acquire Wright's distressed assets, or their contract with Norcrest's other partners, at a significant discount. For the first time all evening, Alistair Sterling smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the thin, sharp smile of a shark that has just scented blood in the water. He looked at me, and for the first time, I felt he was not seeing a junior officer, but a peer. Well played, Ms. Calder, he said slowly. Well played indeed. We will look into it. He nodded once, a gesture of dismissal. Enjoy the rest of your Christmas. And with that, his screen went blank. Vance and Thorne followed suit. I was alone again. Sitting in the quiet of my mother's study, I looked at the clock in the corner of my laptop screen. 7:23 p.m. The entire meeting, the one that had just crippled a multi-million-dollar company, had taken exactly 23 minutes. Christmas, I thought, still had a long way to go. I sat in the silence of my mother's study for almost an hour, letting the adrenaline of the meeting subside. The house was a fortress, and its defenses had held. The enemy was in full retreat, their supply lines cut, their command structure in chaos. It was over. But I had underestimated the power of denial. At 8:41 p.m., there was a knock on the door, not the aggressive, entitled rap of this morning, but a hesitant, uncertain sound. I knew who it was. I walked to the door and opened it. Eden stood on the porch, alone this time, though I could see Miles's truck idling at the curb, a dark shape under the gently falling snow. My sister was no longer the radiant, confident woman who had tried to evict me. She looked diminished, her face pale and tear-streaked, her expensive coat seeming to hang off her small frame. "Ivy," she began, her voice a fragile whisper. Can we just talk?" I didn't answer. I just stepped back, holding the door open. She entered, bringing a gust of cold air with her. She looked around the living room, at the twinkling lights on the tree, at the quiet warmth of the house she had tried to conquer. She finally turned to me, her eyes pleading. "You can't do this, Ivy. You can't just take the house. It's not right. Mom left it for us, for both of us." It was her last-ditch appeal, the one she always fell back on, a desperate invocation of a sisterly bond she had long ago monetized and discarded. She was appealing to a shared history she had spent years trying to erase. "The time for appealing to Mom's wishes ended when you tried to have me thrown out on Christmas Day," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I gestured to the dining room table, where the remnants of our earlier battle still lay. "You tried to operate in a world of lies and force, Eden, so now we will operate in a world of truth, the world of contracts." I walked to the sideboard, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a document. It was bound in a professional blue cover. I placed it on the dining room table with a soft, definitive thud. "This," I said, "is the master lease agreement between the Renfield Trust, as lessor, and Calder Living, LLC, as lessee. It was executed 6 months ago." I opened it to the signature page. The crisp, official signatures of my attorney as trustee and myself as managing member of the LLC stood in stark contrast to the fraudulent scrawl on her deed of gift. Eden stared at it, uncomprehending. "What is this? A lease?" "It is my legal, binding right to inhabit this property for a term of 10 years, with 2 automatic 10-year renewals." I explained calmly. "I am the tenant, the only tenant." I then turned to a different page, already marked with a tab, and pointed to a specific paragraph. "This is Section 7, the Covenant of Quiet Enjoyment. It guarantees the tenant, me, the right to live here, undisturbed. Your actions this morning, Eden, the threats, the illegal notices, the general harassment, they constitute a material breach of this covenant, a breach for which my LLC could sue you, personally, for significant damages." She looked from the paper to my face, the full meaning of it finally dawning on her. I was not just her sister living in their shared house. I was a legal tenant with a 30-year lease and grounds to sue her. But I wasn't finished. I reached back into the drawer and pulled out a second, thinner document. I placed it on the table next to the first. "And this," I said, my voice dropping a little lower, "is the assignment of mortgage note. It documents the sale of the outstanding mortgage on 17 Renfield Street, from Briarwick Mutual Bank to the Renfield Trust." I tapped the final line of the document. "As of 18 months ago, I am the one who holds the debt on this house. Every mortgage payment you thought was going to the bank has been, through a servicing company, funneled to me. If the lease was a wall, this was a cannon. It was the final, absolute shift in the landscape of power." The look on Eden's face was one of complete and utter devastation. The golden girl, the wife of the wealthy heir, had just discovered that she was, in a very real sense, indebted to the quiet, overlooked sister she had tried to discard. The front door opened again. Miles and Karina had clearly seen enough. Their proxy had failed. "What is this nonsense?" Karina demanded, striding into the room, her eyes blazing. Miles was right behind her, his face a thundercloud. Eden couldn't speak. She just pointed a trembling finger at the 2 documents on the table. Miles snatched them up. He read the lease first, his expression darkening. Then he read the assignment of the note. His breath hitched. He dropped the papers on the table as if they were on fire. "This is insane," he spat, looking at me. You can't do this." "I already have," I replied. A fragile, desperate hope flickered in Eden's eyes. "So, what do you want? Ivy? Do you want money? We can pay you. Just name a price." I looked at my sister, at the woman whose first instinct was always to buy her way out of a problem she had created. "I don't want your money, Eden," I said. And then I delivered the twist of the knife, the one that would hurt more than any financial demand. "I want you to have a home. You are, after all, my sister." They all stared at me, stunned into silence. "You can live here," I continued, my voice soft and reasonable. "You and Miles are welcome to stay. Of course, you'll have to submit a formal application as subtenants to Calder Living LLC. There will be a background check, a credit report, and a safety and liability review. You'll have to agree to abide by the terms of the master lease, of course, and if your application is approved," I paused, letting the final word hang in the air. "Then you may live here, with my permission." The offer of mercy was, in fact, an offer of total subjugation. Miles exploded. It was a guttural primal sound of pure, impotent rage. "No, no way! We are not going to ask for your permission to live in our own house." "It's not your house, Miles," I corrected him gently. "You have no ownership stake at all. It is my and Eden's house, and my house is currently controlled by my trust, leased to my company, and indebted to me. So yes, you will ask for my permission." At that exact moment, a sharp, electronic chime cut through the tension. It was the sound of an email arriving. It came from Miles's phone. He glanced down at it, his face already a mask of fury, but as he read the screen, the fury was replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated horror. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." He looked up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "What did you do?" "What is it, Miles?" Karina demanded, her voice sharp. He held up the phone for her to see. I couldn't see the screen, but I knew what it said. The news from the corporate world travels fast when money is involved. "It's from Norcrest Ridge," he stammered. They're pulling the financing for the showroom. They're withdrawing their letter of intent, effective immediately," they cited. "Significant red flags regarding a partner's professional conduct." Ping. A second email chime, this one from Karina's phone. Her face went rigid as she read it. "This is from Arthur Vance," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The lawyer for Stone and Sparrow." She held her phone with a trembling hand, trying to make sense of the legal jargon. She focused on one line. "What does this mean? The vendor has a 30-day right to cure the breach of contract?" She looked up at me, a desperate, grasping hope in her eyes. "We have 30 days. We can fix this." I looked at her, at the powerful matriarch of the Wright family, clutching at a meaningless contractual clause like a drowning woman clutches at straw. How could she cure a felony? How could she fix a fundamental flaw in her son's character? I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. I simply turned, walked to the kitchen, and put the kettle on. I took out a tin of my mother's favorite holiday tea, a blend of black tea, orange peel, and cinnamon. The sweet, spicy scent filled the air as I spooned it into a teapot. They stood frozen in the dining room, their empire crumbling around them, their future disappearing in a cascade of emails they couldn't stop. The kettle began to whistle. I poured the hot water over the tea leaves, the steam rising in a fragrant cloud. I took down a single, clean mug from the cupboard. My mug. I carried it back to the living room, the rich, warm scent of cinnamon cutting through the chilled air of their defeat. I sat down in my armchair, the one by the fire, and took a slow, deliberate sip. I looked over the rim of my cup at the three of them, 3 ghosts at a feast of consequences, and I smiled. A real smile this time, a quiet one, just for me. "Merry Christmas," I said. My Merry Christmas was not a peace offering. It was a statement of fact. For me, it was a Merry Christmas. For them, it was the end of the world. The spell of their shock was broken by a sudden, desperate burst of action. It came from Eden, with a strangled sob. She turned and ran out the front door, leaving it wide open to the cold night. She ran to the back of Miles's truck and yanked open the tailgate. Inside was a single, large suitcase. Her own, the one she had packed for this triumphant takeover. In a final, pathetic display of defiance, she grabbed the handle and began to drag it up the snowy walkway toward the house. It was a symbolic act, a desperate attempt to physically impose her will on a reality that had rejected her. She was going to move in. She was going to prove she had the right. But the snow-dusted slate of the porch steps was slick. Her expensive heeled boots, chosen for style and not for function, found no purchase. She slipped. The suitcase tumbled from her grasp, but it was the other object in her hand that created the scene's final, perfect punctuation. She had been carrying a glass of red wine, one she'd poured in the kitchen in a premature celebration. As she fell, the glass flew from her hand. It didn't shatter. It arced through the cold air and landed with a soft, wet splash right on the pile of fraudulent documents she and Miles had left on the coffee table. The dark red liquid bloomed across the cheap printer paper, a bloody Rorschach test of their failure. The smeared, illegitimate notary stamp dissolved into a pinkish, meaningless smudge. Eden lay on the porch, a sobbing heap of cashmere and defeat. I walked to the open door. The cold air felt cleansing. I didn't look down at my sister. I looked past her, at the small, laminated sign that had been zip-tied to our wrought iron railing while we were inside. It was from the Renfield Gardens HOA. I pointed to it. "You might want to read that before you bring your luggage any further," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the still night air. Karina and Miles, drawn to the doorway by the commotion, looked out. The sign was professionally printed, its message stark under the yellow glow of the porch light. Notice: pending zoning inspection. No new occupants permitted until further notice. It was Carol, the HOA president. My email had not just resulted in a fine. It had triggered an immediate, physical response. They had been officially barred from entry. As if on cue, my phone, which I still held in my hand, began to ring. It was a FaceTime call from an unknown number. I answered it and angled the screen so they could all see. A man's face, weary and framed by a headset, appeared. The logo for the Briarwick zoning office was visible on the wall behind him. It was Marcus, the on-call inspector. "Ms. Calder?" he asked. "Yes, Marcus, I'm here. I have you on speaker." "Good," he said, his voice all business. "I'm just calling to officially confirm that, based on the evidence you submitted, we have scheduled a formal inspection for 9 a.m. on December 27th. I need to make it clear for the record. Any attempt by new parties to take up residence at 17 Renfield Street before that inspection is completed will constitute a willful violation of municipal code and will result in immediate and significant daily fines." "I understand completely," I said. "Thank you for your diligence." He nodded and the screen went blank. I looked at Miles. The chain of consequences, invisible to him just moments before, was now wrapping around his neck. First the corporate suspension, then the financing deal, now the city itself. He was being attacked on all fronts. Buzz. A low vibration, not my phone. It was the chorus of their phones. A group email had just landed. Miles looked down at his screen. Karina did the same. I knew what it was. It was the official memo from Arthur Vance, on behalf of the Stone and Sparrow Board. Its distribution would be wide, a digital carpet bomb. Memorandum. 2. All Stone and Sparrow, capital vendors and partners. From Office of the General Counsel, date, December 25th. Subject: immediate suspension of vendor contract. Wright Masonry. Effective immediately. All contracts and associated payments between Stone and Sparrow Capital and Wright Masonry are suspended pending a formal ethics and integrity investigation. All inquiries should be directed to this office. This was not a private reprimand. This was a public execution. The news would be all over the county's business community within the hour. Wright Masonry, a company that ran on reputation and lines of credit, had just had both severed at the root. Miles made a choking sound. His face was ashen. He had just seen his family's legacy go up in smoke because he couldn't resist bullying his sister-in-law. Buzz. Another one, just for Miles this time. A text message. He looked at it, and a new kind of panic, something more primal and immediate, washed over his face. It was the bank. The automated alert that every business owner dreads. Briarwick Merchants Bank Alert. Your commercial line of credit has been temporarily frozen pending a review of your primary contractor status. Their working capital was gone. The money they used to pay their employees, to buy materials, to keep the lights on, it was frozen. I hadn't even had to make a call. The bank's risk management algorithms, triggered by the news of the Stone and Sparrow suspension, had done it for me. The final domino had fallen. Eden pushed herself up from the cold slate steps. She stumbled into the house, her eyes wild with a grief that had nothing to do with our mother or this house. It was the grief of a princess who had just seen her castle turn to dust. She stared at me, the source of it all. The tears streamed down her face, washing away the last of her makeup, the last of her pretense. "What do you want from me, Ivy?" she cried, her voice raw and broken. "What do you want?" I looked at my sister, my beautiful, golden, broken sister. I had 1,000 possible answers. I could have asked for an apology. I could have demanded financial restitution. I could have banished her from my life forever. But I chose the one thing that had been missing from our entire relationship, the one thing she had never been willing to give. For the first time in our lives, "Eden," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. "I want the truth." The word hung between us, a foreign concept. Truth was not a currency in her world. She looked desperately toward her mother-in-law, her last, most powerful ally. "Karina?" she pleaded. Karina Wright stood in the doorway, her face unreadable. She looked at Eden, the crying, defeated girl who had failed to secure the asset. She looked at the spilled wine staining the fraudulent deed. She looked at her son, whose arrogance had just crippled their company, and she made a calculated decision. She was cutting her losses. Without a word, Karina turned around. She walked back out onto the porch. She paused, and in a gesture of final, cold detachment, she pulled off her expensive fur-lined gloves and dropped them on the railing, a discarded skin. Then she walked down the steps, got into her car, and drove away, leaving her son and her daughter-in-law behind in the ruins. Miles, a man adrift, numbly followed his mother's lead, stumbling out to his truck. Now it was just the two of us, the sisters of Renfield Street. Eden stood in the middle of the living room, shivering, abandoned, and utterly alone. I walked over to the box of tissues on the end table and held it out to her. She took one, her hand shaking. "You have a choice, Eden," I said, my voice soft now, without any trace of malice. It was the voice of a compliance officer stating the terms. "You can submit a formal application to become a subtenant. It will be reviewed. Or you can pack your bags and leave tonight. The house is not yours," I thought, "but the choice is—" My offer, a choice between subjugation and exile, hung in the quiet room between us. The house, warm and bright with Christmas lights, became a silent observer. Outside, the snow fell, blanketing the world in a pristine, indifferent white. Eden stood on the threshold, a lone figure caught between the cold, dark reality of her failure and the warm, lamplit world she had tried and failed to claim. Snowflakes caught in her hair, melting like fleeting, icy tears. She looked past me, into the living room, her gaze falling on the mantelpiece where our childhood stockings had hung every year. She looked at the armchair where our mother used to read, at the faint scuff marks on the floor where we had once danced. This was not just an asset to her. I knew that. It was a symbol, the last remnant of the perfect family she had curated in her mind, and she had just lost her right to it. The fight had gone out of her, the entitlement, the arrogance, the righteous fury. It had all been burned away, leaving behind something raw and exhausted. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the cold air filling her lungs, her shoulders, which had been tense and high with defiance, finally fell. She started, her voice barely a whisper, a thread of sound in the vast silence. I'll submit the application. It was a surrender, complete and unconditional. It was the first time in her life she had ever truly lost, and in that loss, she had chosen the path of humility over the path of pride. I gave a single, slow nod. There was no triumph in my gesture, no gloating. It was simply an acknowledgement of a transaction. A business decision had been made. The inspector from the zoning office will be here at 9:00 a.m. on December 27th, I stated, my voice calm and factual. You will be here to meet him with me. You will explain that your plans to have your in-laws move in were a misunderstanding. I was not just granting her a path forward. I was making her an accomplice in the cleanup. From the curb, the sound of a truck door slamming shut broke the stillness. Miles had been watching, waiting. He had seen her surrender. A string of raw, guttural curses tore through the quiet night air, directed at her, at me, at the universe that had dared to defy him. He wasn't going to stay. He wasn't going to beg. He gunned the engine, the sound a cold, angry roar in the snowy silence, and peeled away from the curb, his tires spitting slush in his wake. He was following his mother, retreating to the safety of the only world he understood, leaving his wife standing on my doorstep. Eden flinched at the sound but did not turn to watch him go. She just stood there, a statue of regret. I stepped back into the warmth of the house. You should go. Eden, we will talk on the 27th. She nodded numbly and turned, walking down the steps into the falling snow, a solitary figure with nowhere to go. But anywhere was better than here. I closed the heavy oak door, the latch clicking shut with a sound of profound finality. On the small screen of the smart doorbell panel next to the door, a notification glowed briefly before fading to black. New recording saved. The final piece of evidence was secure. The house was mine. The silence that filled it now was not the tense, watchful silence of before, but a deep, peaceful quiet. It was the silence of solitude, not of loneliness. The battle was over. I walked to the fireplace. Tucked away in a chest beside it was a box of my mother's decorations. I opened it, the scent of dried cedar and old paper rising to meet me. From inside, I pulled out her Christmas stocking. It was needlepoint, a little faded, with her name, Eleanor, stitched in gold thread at the top. I hung it on the brass hook in the center of the mantelpiece, right where it had always belonged. Then, I found a candle, a thick pillar scented with cinnamon and clove. I placed it on the mantel and lit it. A tiny flame flickered to life, its warm, spicy fragrance slowly beginning to fill the room, chasing away the last lingering scent of Eden's perfume and the right's aggression. In the quiet, I pulled out my phone. I sent a single, concise text message to the private group chat for the Stone and Sparrow Executive Board. 3 words. Risk mitigated. My gaze fell upon the dining room table, the scene of the final confrontation. The thick, blue-bound master lease agreement lay exactly where I had left it, its corners sharp, its pages clean. A few feet away, the fraudulent deed of gift was a ruin, a soggy, stained mess of paper, the spilled red wine looking like a wound. My victory was clean, dry, and contractual. Theirs was a chaotic, self-inflicted stain. I went to the kitchen and poured the now steeped tea into my mug. The warmth spread through my fingers as I carried it back to my armchair by the fire. The tiny candle flame danced, casting flickering shadows on the walls. The house was breathing again. It was safe. It was home. I took a sip of the hot, spicy tea and allowed myself a small, quiet smile. A smile meant for no one but me. I had not fought fire with fire. I had fought fire with law, with patience, with the truth. I had let their own greed and arrogance become the fuel for their destruction. The house is not yours, I whispered to the empty, peaceful room. The choice is... The camera of the mind pulls back, leaving me in the armchair, a solitary figure in the warm glow of the Christmas tree and the single, Steady flame of the candle, a flame that needed no more fuel, a story that needed no more words, a quiet victory that needed no applause. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Let's connect. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And if you'd like to help even more, hit that hype button to help this story reach more listeners.